Star Trek has left a large imprint on humanity over its 50-year history. During that time, we have seen many innovations inspired by that TV show. We see its legacy in all electronics, our laptops, cell phones, the internet, 3D printing, and so much more. Right now, we are experimenting on the M drive, an inspiration of the warp drive, to travel at incredible speeds to the stars. In the show, we see wars, peace, alliances, new worlds, and unexplained phenomenon as well. We also see questions about the meaning of life itself. We go from the founding of the Federation of Planets to beyond the Hobostar incident. This documentary also explains the same in its prime universe, what took place before the founding of the Federation to beyond the Hobostar incident. And as many of you are aware, the history of the United Federation of Planets is a tale of extraordinary interstellar union, slowly forged from the convergence of human, Vulcan, Tellurite, and Andorian histories, intertwined and those of its other member species. The series of Star Trek has influenced mankind for over 50 years, and in that time we have seen Trek shows, movies that pushed the boundaries of an imagination of a hopeful future. Its grand scale and dreams of a man named Gene Roddenberry, who hoped for a utopian future where mankind can look past its differences and to come together in equal footing with its fellow man. The series is canonical history which to describe is the part of the prime universe and begins billions of years ago when an ancient race who I have dubbed the first one, who also Spock has dubbed Sargon's people, seeded the stars with their encoded DNA in hopes that the races that would be spawned from that DNA could put their pieces together and learn that they are all united by the same cause. It is what Star Trek is all about, seeking out new life and new civilization, to learn from them and find common ground, and stand united under that to live free to pursue the future of mutual prosperity. Fast forward to about 65 million years ago, and an intelligent reptile species known as the Hadrosaur left the Earth to become the Voth, right before the Great Cataclysm destroyed their home. They set out across the galaxy looking for a new civilization and a new home. They eventually settled upon the Delta Quadrant and founded the Voth civilization. 600,000 years ago, though, in the galaxy ruled the Klingon Empire. The Klingon Empire was a massive empire. This empire had a population of trillions, and it was highly advanced. Technologically, the Klingon had the ability to move entire stars using planets as outposts for defense. They employed guardians, known as portals, to defend these outposts and act as gatekeepers for those seeking entry to the Empire. Historical eras for this civilization were described as ages, measured by the Klingon's use of the galactic motionary star time charts. The latter ages of the Empire were the Bastu, the Simi, the Xora, and the Maktu. During the age of Maktu, when the central star of the home system was destabilized and went supernova, it destroyed the Empire, and long after the Empire had disappeared, another powerful race rose in its place, known as the Iconians, who salvaged what was left of the Empire and built their own empire in its place. But their empire was vastly different. It was terrible and brutal. Many races dubbed savage the Empire was, and as they were called, the demons of air and darkness. For whence the Iconians used their powerful gateways to invade, they would subjugate and terrorize their subjects. A coalition of worlds was able to unite to destroy the Iconian Empire, but it came at great cost. Many of these empires who fought the Iconians were never heard from again. Before the Earthian Ice Age 10,000 years ago, a few civilizations came to power in the galaxy. One of them was the Dominion. Founded by the Changelings, she sought out peaceful coexistence with his neighbors, only to be treated like animals and lesser beings. This event led the Changelings to radicalizing their culture to subjugate other races. They were to create the Jem'Hadar, to use these sleepless, unstoppable, loyal soldiers to keep all races under the Dominion in line, and when thousands of years would pass, these changelings would finally be referred to as the Founders. Another race, known as the Sphere Builders, launched giant-sized spheres to create a home for the people to live, since they could not only survive in transdimensional space. However, the drawbacks of these spheres influencing space around them had inadvertently created the Delphic Expanse. This expanse would wreak havoc upon ships and civilizations alike. It would isolate the powers deep inside the Delphic Expanse from outside the Expanse. By the beginning of the Earthian Middle Ages, the Great Awakening had occurred on Vulcan, where the people were split on ideology and refused the teachings of Surik. These people who left under the Raptor's wing left Vulcan to establish their own society, and they were later called the Romulans. These Romulans were xenophobic, paranoid, and militaristic. But also rising during this period was the Klingons, who, led by Kahless the Unforgettable, united the great houses of the Klingons to form the Klingon Empire. This empire was nearly destroyed after 500 years of being founded by the Herc civilization. Nothing much was known about this mysterious aggressor, except the fact that they plundered Kronos and stole the sword of Kahless, and it would be over 800 years before they would see a threat upon their empire so great since. Here on Earth, the planet was visited and observed and occasionally manipulated during its history. Prior to the first contact by Vulcans, the earliest extraterrestrial visits was by a race known as the Sky Spirits, originally native to the Delta Quadrant. These visits included those by an ancient humanoid race, who these people called the Preservers. Descendants of humans were abducted around 4000 BC, who also became known as the basis for the Greek gods, and also the Vulcans themselves also visited Earth. Although this was disputed, as there was no proof of evidence offered by the Vulcan High Command of human abduction by Vulcans for close study. The humpback whales were also being observed by an unknown entity, who, upon the loss of contact with the species, sent a probe to investigate the absence of whale song. In the 19th century, a race called the Skagarans abducted several thousand humans from the American West and then used them as slave labor in a remote system in the Delphic Expanse. Because of the Delphic Expanse, these humans would be cut off from the rest of society and other humans, and would not be known to humanity in general until after the Xindi incident had occurred. The Elorians, a race that could live for hundreds of years, lived in the Alpha Quadrant after fleeing the attacks from the Borg. One of these Elorians was named Guinan, and Guinan stayed secretly and discreetly on Earth. And in the 1930s, the brewery visited Earth and abducted several individuals, including the famous pilot Amelia Earhart. And then throughout the 20th century, they would also abduct others as well. Many events took place that were logged by Star Trek captains. And during the early 20th century, when humanity was just recovering from its first world war, the Andorians made contact with Vulcan, who had achieved spaceflight back in the 4th century during the Time of Awakening, but, however, lost most of its technological prowess for over 1,500 years since, due to the events of the Time of Awakening. Because of the Time of Awakening, it changed Vulcan society forever, and that thousands of years of passion, violence, and war which nearly destroyed their race, they had finally turned to logic to suppress their emotion. Led by their spiritual leader Surak, they formed what became known as the modern-day Vulcan society. Those who didn't agree with Surak's teaching were driven off Vulcan or left on their own accord to find a home for themselves. These exiles were called the Debrun and the Romulans, and according to the Vulcans, their first contact with Andorians seemed promising. However, due to the Andorians' heightened emotions, the Vulcans would soon see them as duplicitous, wishing only to honor agreements that didn't conflict with their interests. A border dispute dating back to the 1950s, lasting over 200 years, began between the two powers due to their neighboring home of the systems and Vulcan suspicions towards the territorial and militaristic nature of the Andorians. The Andorians felt that the only thing that kept the Vulcans from invading Andoria was the massive threat of retaliation. In 1947, a Ferengi ship from the 24th century crash-landed in Roswell, New Mexico. The Air Force studied the Ferengi in great detail, but after they escaped, the Air Force covered up the story by saying that all they saw was a crashed weather balloon. And in the 1950s, a team of Vulcan explorers had lost contact with the Vulcan High Command, and they were temporarily stranded on Earth. Tellarites were warp-capable and involved in interspecies communication by the 20th century, and by 1957, a Tellarite freighter picked up the distress call of a Vulcan ship that crash-landed on Earth near Carbon Creek, Pennsylvania. They passed this information along to the High Command. During its long history, the existence of the planet has been threatened by both natural disasters and actions of alien intelligence. In the early 2000s, the Xindi traveled to the past around this time to enlist the help of a blood doctor to collect blood types for all humans. And in doing so, they would create a virus that would destroy all of humanity, thus making the Xindi safe from human threat. But unknowing to them, this was just a stage and a ploy for the Sphere Builders to expand upon their influence and power throughout this universe. Other incidents, such as the incident with the Eastern Coalition during the Third World War. The events leading up to the war, including the Bell Riots themselves, changed the face of humanity forever. Because of the dominance of the Eastern Coalition and the suppression of rights of man, it didn't take long for war not only to break out, but to quickly escalate into the most costly conflict humanity had ever seen since World War II. back in the 1930s and 40s. After 2.5-decade war, 600 million people would lie dead. The planet would be practically swimming in radiation, following the rapid fire of launching nuclear missiles, causing a practically planet-wide nuclear winter. Nearly all of Earth's governments had fallen. Very few that survived, including the United States, got together in San Francisco to sign a peace that would last for longer than they ever thought that would. And in 2063 in Bozeman, Montana, Earth became warp capable, which the same year the humans experienced their first official contact with an alien species, the Vulcans. The first warp drive that was developed in 2063 by Zefram Cochrane was launched on April 5th, 2063. Just after 11 p.m., he broke the warp barrier, and it was enough to draw attention of the Vulcan survey ship, which was passing near Earth. His actions led to 50 years of eradicating disease, poverty, and interplanetary war, and the Vulcans had great fascinations with humans, whom they both feared and respected. Their fear led them to slow the progress of Earth's warp program, hoping humanity doesn't become like the Klingon. Many vessels were built after Cochrane's flight. One was such as the SS Conestoga, a Terran colony ship that was in service with the Earth Space Agency in the mid to late 21st century. Launched from Earth in 2069, only 6 years after Zefram Cochrane's warp flight, the transport's mission was the colonization of Terra Nova, a nearby M-class planet not too far away. Conestoga was capable of carrying approximately 200 colonists and was equipped for long-term travel. The Conestoga was commanded by Captain Mitchell, and that ship eventually found Terra Nova and landed and formed the first human colony outside the solar system. This colony, however, lost contact with Earth when a natural disaster such as an asteroid impacted the planet and irradiated the atmosphere. It wouldn't be for another 100 years before the colony would be able to re-establish contact with Earth. In the early 22nd century, Zefram Cochrane designed a style of warp reactor that was fitted aboard J-class freighters. He also collaborated with Henry Archer on the Warp 5 engine around this time, working hard to develop it and help make it a reality. In 2119, Zefram Cochrane officially opened the Warp 5 complex on Earth. Making a speech at the opening ceremony, Zefram Cochrane met Henry's son Jonathan Archer, the future captain of the Enterprise NX-01. The warp drive required many years of research, and because of the Vulcans, who did not trust the humans fully yet because they were not enlightened as they were, decided to hold them back on their warp research, they would have been at Warp 7 by the time the Enterprise NX-01 would have been launched, according to Charles Tucker III. With the exploits and adventures of the Enterprise NX-01 commanded by Jonathan Archer and his second-in-command DePaul, who was a Vulcan of the Vulcan High Command, their adventures would change the minds of the Vulcans, allowing humanity to be able to stand on its own after the time of the Second Awakening. As the Enterprise NX-01 takes flight and its exploration of the Beta and Alpha Quadrant helped humanity make first contact with the Andorians, the Tellarites, the Mazarites, the Xyrillians, and, sadly, the Klingons. During their mission, they exposed the Vulcan listening post to the Andorians at Pajem, interfered in Klingon affairs, which led to Captain Archer's capture and trial and eventual sentence at Rorapenthe, in which he would later escape. He also made first contact, although by a disastrous first contact, with the Romulans in a Romulan minefield. But that didn't stop the Enterprise from continuing on in its mission. However, by 2153, Earth was preemptively attacked by the Xindi, who were unwittingly helping a faction fight the Temporal Cold War. Using a smaller prototype version of the planned Xindi weapon, the weapon destroyed a section of the planet stretching from Florida to Venezuela, killing over 7 million people, including Charles Tucker III's sister. This event began what would be later known as the Xindi Crisis. For the next year, the Enterprise endured the Delphic Expanse and adapted to its harsh conditions. They had eventually fought for peace during the Xindi Civil War, and the Earth-allied Xindi were victorious, and the Sphere Builders were sent back to their transdimensional realm. After the crisis, Earth faced its demons twice, once against the Augments awakened by Dr. Soon, and another during when the Earth's first movement, known as Terra Prime. Both times, Jonathan Archer saved humanity and Starfleet, but it came at a great cost. The Klingons had a crisis of their own. The mutagenic virus, which caused by augment DNA, recovered from a crashed Klingon bird of prey, which was actually commandeered by the previously mentioned augments. This problem caused the Earth and Klingon crisis, the first of its kind, with many more to come. A cure was found in time, but it put Earth on Klingons' radar, perceiving them as a threat for the next 100 years, and a state of Cold War would exist between the two powers. Due to this tension, the Romulans took advantage and attempted to stop Earth from forming alliances with the Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites. Their efforts actually succeeded in doing quite the opposite, and was known as the Babel Crisis. Earth exposed the Romulans in trying to turn races against each other and destabilize the entire region. And in 2061, the Federation Charter was signed and the Federation was born. Between 2155 and 2161, the Earth-Romulan War would take place after the Babel Crisis. The Babel Crisis showed that humanity and other races can learn to work together and fight for a common goal. In this case, they all fought against the Romulans, and at the Battle of Chiron, they became victorious. This peace between the humans and the Romulans established the Romulan neutral zone, and by the 23rd century, this alliance between the humans and other races became known as the Federation, and it expanded to include many worlds. By the 2240s, the Federation was facing a Cold War with the Klingons, and in 2245, the USS Enterprise, the NCC-1701, was launched. It was a constitutional-class starship that served under 5 captains from 2245 to 2285, including such captains such as Robert April, Christopher Pike, William Decker, and in later years, Captain Spock as well. And its most famous commander would be Captain James T. Kirk, whose 5-year mission aboard the Enterprise became legendary. Kirk became an icon in the Federation and a hero. His deeds and exploits were even revered by the Klingons, as mentioned by General Chang of the Klingon High Council. His deeds were even remembered by an alien species well into the 24th century. In 2285, the Enterprise was destroyed in the Genesis Crisis, where the Klingon Crusaders, crusading to preserve their race, attacked the Enterprise over the Federation-created planet of Genesis by use of the Genesis device, and Kirk was declared a renegade until the end of the whale probe incident, where he saved Earth by traveling in time and rescue and bring back 2 humpback whales to save Earth from crisis from the whale probe. And by the end of that incident, though Kirk being a renegade, he was downgraded from admiral to captain, and he would be able to go on to serve on the Enterprise A, which was launched later on that year. In 2293, when the Klingon moon Praxis exploded due to overmining and insufficient safety precautions, Spock led a diplomatic mission to extend peace talks with the Klingons in hopes to save the Klingons from a powerful and complete collapse of their civilization. But due to the meddling of the peace talks by the Romulans and anti-peace agents, Kirk and Leonard McCoy were labeled as scapegoats and sentenced to Rora Penthe for the assassination of Chancellor Gorkon, the Chancellor of the High Council. The Kinnaman Accords were signed after the Romulan and anti-peace agents were exposed, and Kirk and Leonard McCoy were eventually absolved of all charges, and from 2293 to the 2340s, the Federation enjoyed a relative amount of peace as they were able to explore like never before. The USS Enterprise B, which was later launched that year of 2293, was a refit Excelsior-class starship. The ship was under the command of Captain John Harriman and was noted for rescuing 47 Elorians who were originally fleeing from the Borg from the Nexus. The Tomed incident in 2311 would be one of the few times that the Federation faced heat from the Romulans and signed an agreement not to use cloaking technology. In 2344, the Enterprise C, after launched, responded to a distress call from the Klingon outpost of Narendra 3, which was under attack by the Romulan Star Empire. When the Enterprise arrived at the outpost, she was engaged by 4 Romulan warbirds. The ship suffered major damage, but she allowed the Klingons to escape the devastation by the Romulans. Her sacrifice allowed human and Klingon relations to be warm and peaceful. During a firefight, a temporal rift was created, and the Enterprise C entered and almost instantly emerged from it. Once re-emerged, it was destroyed by the Romulans. The survivors of the Enterprise C were captured by the Romulans, and the Romulans interrogated the survivors, and one of the survivors was named Tashiar, who was of an alternate universe which a temporal rift was created to. She courted a Romulan official who took pity on her and spared her life. He married her and had a child, which becomes Sayla, and Tasha attempted to steal Sayla from the Romulans, but was caught eventually and executed by the Romulans. Sayla would go on to serve in the Tal Shiar, in the Romulan Secret Police and Intelligence Agency. At the end of the Battle of Narendra 3, Starfleet would not commission another Enterprise until nearly 2 decades later in 2363. From the 2340s to the 2360s, the Federation would find itself embroiled with the war with the Cardassians. Within the Cardassians came the DMZ. After the war with the Cardassians, a DMZ was set up, which many Federation colonists opposed, and this DMZ had far-flung reaching consequences. In 2063, the Enterprise D was launched. It was a Galaxy-class starship that served under 3 captains, From 2363 to 2371, one of the captains of the Enterprise D was famously known as Jean-Luc Picard, who commanded the ship for the majority of its service. The ship was briefly captained by not only William T. Riker and then Edward Jellicoe. The Enterprise D was the Federation flagship and made first contact with over 30 species. It participated in the Klingon Civil War and was the first starship to visit another galaxy. When Jean-Luc Picard took command of the Enterprise D, he ended up making contact with the Q Continuum. The Q charged humanity of being a savage child race and told them that they would be on trial for their savage past. During this trial, which actually continued throughout Picard's career, Picard faced first contact situation with fledgling powers, helped the Federation colonists transition in the DMZ, stopping the Romulan plot to overthrow the Klingon government, and many more. His exploits would nearly match those of Kirk over 100 years prior, and in 2366, in response to the Borg threat to the Federation, after initial and first contact with the Borg, Starfleet did what it had done in decades, was placed greater emphasis on Starfleet's essential role in the defense of the Federation. Drafting plans for such a defense required a starship capable of fighting against the Borg. The Federation's devastating defeat at the Battle of Wolf 359, resulting in the loss of nearly 40 ships and 11,000 personnel to a single Borg vessel, proved that the Federation's defenses were horribly inadequate, and plans were to spearhead for the production of more combat-capable starships, including the Defiant class and the Kira class. Officially classified as an escort vessel, the Defiant was nothing less than Starfleet's first design of a warship capable of combating the Borg. The vessel featured minimal equipment for scientific research. It was not designed to accommodate families. The Defiant did not perform well in its initial trial runs. The vessel was overpowered and overgunned for a ship its size, so much so that the Defiant nearly shook itself apart when its engines were tested at full power. Ultimately, these design flaws, combined with the Borg threat becoming less urgent, led the Starfleet to decide to abandon the project and place the prototype in storage. In 2369, 2 years after the Battle of Wolf 359, Deep Space Nine began its operations under Federation control in 2369, when it changed hands from the Cardassians and the Bajorans. As the Bajoran Provisional Government overthrew the Cardassians and took control of the station, the Federation moved in to help the Bajoran government and protect them from further retaliation of the Cardassians as per the Federation-Cardassian Treaty. The 2370s were considered the darkest period in Federation history. The Federation became aware of the Dominion when they discovered the wormhole that traveled from the Alpha to the Gamma Quadrant by Deep Space Nine. This wormhole became essential to all of the Alpha Quadrant powers as well as the Dominion. Because of this perceived threat of the Federation by the Dominion intruding upon their territory in the Gamma Quadrant, they decided to meddle in the politics of all Alpha Quadrant powers. In 2371, the Enterprise D was rendered unsalvageable during the Battle of Meridian 3. The USS Voyager was also flung into the far reaches of the Delta Quadrant and was initially presumed lost by Starfleet until contact was restored years later. The Defiant and Enterprise E was launched by the end of the 2372, and after a year out in space on a shakedown cruise, both ships flew to Earth to protect the Earth against the second Borg cube which attacked Earth in 2373. Federation problems had only just begun, as the problems in the Cardassian DMZ caused the colonists to rebel against the Federation Treaty, and the two colony holdings between the Federation and the Cardassians started their own little war. With the turmoil in Cardassia, the collapse of the Obsidian Order of the preemptive strike failed against the founders of the Dominion, forced the power vacuum in which civilian authority took over. The Klingons took this as a ploy, and under the advice of General Martok, who unknowingly to anyone else was a changeling himself, led an unprovoked invasion of Cardassia. The Federation denounced the attack, and in response, the Klingon withdrew from the Khitomer Accords, and in doing so sparked a year-long war with the Klingons. After General Martok was exposed as a changeling and was subsequent in his involvement in the Federation-Klingon War, the Federation and the Klingons went back to the table and became allies against the common foe, and the Second Khitomer Accords were signed. But the Dominion War would prove to be even too much for this Federation-Klingon alliance. And so before the end of 2374, the Federation did the unthinkable. It was able to bring the Romulans into the war with the use of sabotage of Senator Vreenak's shuttle, but frame the Dominion to make it look like they did it. And in 2375, the Borg decided to create another strategy. While they were talking to Seven of Nine, the Borg Queen suggested that since all direct assaults on Earth have failed, They planned to detonate a biogenetic charge in Earth's atmosphere, infecting all life forms with nanoprobe viruses, triggering a gradual assimilation. And according to the Borg Cream, half of the population of Earth would be drones before Earth had even known that what was going on. However, this plot was thwarted by the Voyager crew. And also in 2375, the Breen Confederacy attacked Earth in a surprise attack on Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco during the Dominion War, with the Breen in the war and their new energy-dampening weapon which caused the destruction of Defiant. Later that year, due to the efforts of the DS9 crew, the Alpha Quadrant Alliance found a defense against the energy-dampening weapon of the Breen, and the war finally came to an end after the Battle of Cardassia. This war and this victory came at a great cost for both sides. A disease struck the Founders which almost nearly wiped them out. The Klingons were so weakened by this war that it would take decades for them to recover. The Federation lost nearly half of its fleet, and Beta Z lie in ruins because it was occupied by the Dominion for almost a year. And in 2376, the starship Voyager encounters another Federation ship in the Delta Quadrant. However, it is learned that it's not a long-range vessel that they were hoping for, but a short-range science vessel known as the Equinox. When it was learned that the Equinox was violating the Prime Directive and murdering life forms for energy, it would later become the Equinox's destruction. Only 5 crew members were willing to survive. They were stripped of rank and ordered to serve as crewmen on Voyager, with the extensive supervision and limited privileges. Voyager was able to get the Borg Unimatrix Zero drones to rebel against the Collective, thereby starting the Borg Civil War. Also, due to the actions of Reginald Barclay, that his Pathfinder project, which he put his career on the line for, and paid off with the events of contacting Voyager from the Alpha Quadrant to the Delta Quadrant. That moment gave everyone hope of Starfleet and Voyager contacting each other for the years to come. In 2378, Voyager would eventually be able to return home, thanks in part or in full due to the assistance of alternate future Admiral Janeway, who led Voyager to destroy a transwarp hub using advanced technology never seen before, like the transphasic torpedo technology and the ablative armor generator. Once they returned home, Captain Janeway was promoted to the rank of Admiral and assisted the Federation in Delta Quadrant matters. Also, in 2379, an incident on Romulus would bring the Federation into an eternal power struggle, and in doing so, Praetor Shinzon intended to destroy all life on Earth using a Thalaron weapon built into the Riemann Warbird scimitar. Later on, in 2387, the Hobus star was about to go supernova. Ambassador Spock arrived on Romulus in an attempt to save the planet from destruction. He tried to warn his brethren on Romulus that the world was in danger of being destroyed by the supernova. However, once he got a red matter device that would create a black hole to stop the supernova, he failed to act quickly enough to save the Romulan people, and the planet was destroyed. Despite the planet's destruction, Ambassador Spock was able to initiate the device and carry out his mission to destroy the supernova with the black hole. However, due to the events of the destruction of Romulus, one man would carry out his vengeance upon Spock and attempted to attack him. This man was named Nero, the captain of a Romulan mining vessel. Having lost his wife and unborn child on Romulus's annihilation, Nero followed Spock, and the two ships accidentally get caught up in the black hole, which has the effect of throwing them backwards in time 150 years. Due to this event, created an alternate timeline known as the Kelvin Timeline. This series of Star Trek and the Prime Universe is currently the official canon. There's also the Kelvin Timeline, the Mirror Universe, and other quantum universes, including the antimatter universe that Kirk visited in the original animated series. These non-Prime universes are part of canon, but I wanted to fully delve into the Prime Universe since its lore is so rich. However, the Mirror Universe does have some rich lore, like which the Prime Universe also has in terms of races, but the power players are different. Instead of the Federation, you have the Terran Empire, who instead of peacefully coexisting with its neighbors, subjugated them. And the Klingons, instead of attacking and going at war with Cardassia, formed a union with Cardassia, which eventually included worlds such as Bajor, led by a regent known as Regent Worf. Unlike his Prime Universe counterpart, he had major disdain for the Terrans. Star Trek itself has a mind of its own, and that mind is a mind of peace, equality, and love for their fellow neighbor, that we could all coexist to better ourselves and to better humanity as well. This dream by Gene Roddenberry would live on in these series as well. of all the Star Trek series, all of them together, has changed the way humanity has looked at itself forever. Well, thank you for watching and thank you for subscribing. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to this channel, Iron Tusk 341, and click that alert button when you could be alerted when I uploaded my next documentary. Next week, I'll be talking about the series of Babylon 5, which I will explain to you in detail. And as always, thanks for watching.